Thank you so much for staying with us this morning. Well, next is to have a conversation, as you've seen there, with Dr. Mustafa Akinkunmi, who is an African economist with more than 30 years of experience using technology, statistical and econometric methods of estimating, forecasting, and predicting macroeconomic and financial-related data set. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
Morning. Well, let's begin with well, it's not an elephant in the room. It's quite a humongous one right here, talking about technology and all of that, especially the role it has to play in this transition that we're making into a cashless economy. What's your take on the entire conversation?
Look, something similar like this happened in the turn of the millennium. If I recollect, I was on Wall Street then. I was doing quants, and everybody was scared that things we will not be able to get our data back. Essentially, what it means by that is that for many years we had 2 digits, 19, and we're now getting to 99. So we had to add, typically we usually add 1 to it. So we now thought, things were blow up. So many of us were much younger. I was slightly younger then, and we spent a whole year, or even more than that, testing all different applications and making sure that this thing will work and will succeed. I think that is where CBN failed. Great policy, but I think they did not go through the process properly to the bottleneck with the technology, and especially when it comes to the tremendous amount of heat was expected, at least from the transaction going on the electronic side. And of course, on the cash side, the cash in circulation is a whole total different story entirely. I have my views on that, but it's unfortunate. But it's great policy, but it's just the implementation that some of us are doing.
Yeah, we'll come to your take on what the liquidity ratio should be, but speak to that technology part, a little more. What are the options available to us in the light of 1, the population, 2, internet integration or penetration, 3, digital knowledge or education of the people, 4, the number of banked or unbanked, 5, maybe state of the economy. I could go on and on. Maybe I already caught the African economist bug from you right now.
You see, look, my experience spanned between technology, economics, and finance. That is what I spent the last almost 40 years. Now I'm telling my age, about 40 years of my life doing. So we didn't have much of an issue, of course, up until last month, when this issue of they're pulling the cash out of the economy. However, we had some of the jackpot syndrome of the technology kids running out of the country. And I thought, in my opinion, was that a lot of the bank execs, they acted too slow to be able to keep those guys. I was one of those guys in the 90s when in New York City, when they started paying many of us were kept in the back office, and they saw the importance of technology, and those companies in those days started paying many of us the front office salary. And I think what a lot of the banks, the mistake they made, they should have topped these guys, keep them in front of Japa. So they should have upped their remuneration at least close to 100 million and keep those, because a lot of these banks are making those profits. So why let them go? And many of us are now suffering. But that's another story. But back to CBN. CBN did not address the amount of penetration of what potentially would happen, because they should have tested that, and they should have increased the amount of usage of individuals, at least that are involved in electronic banking part of the transactions. So that's essentially that's what happened, because the story, you have so many people that their transaction could not commit for hours, for days. That's as a result of the number of hits that was going on. So that's a whole different issue from the cash in circulation. Cash in circulation is another totally different story entirely. As I said again, great policy. The president has spoken, and I support the policy. I think it's the right thing to do. The benefit outweighs the issues and challenges that we faced in the last few days.
Dr. Kikume, you say that our banks failed to see the importance of keeping these, should I call them back office tech workers? But you have been a consultant to the Central Bank of Nigeria. And I think that your advice to the Central Bank of Nigeria would have percolated down to the commercial banks as well, so that they would have known what to do.
Unfortunately, I left Central Bank. I was in Central Bank as a consultant for a decade. And my last day at the Central Bank was December 2017. So that was quite some time ago. And things have changed since then. I mean, of course, if Central Bank had called me, I would have advised them at least to pay attention to the technology aspects of the whole cash in circulation. They should have paid more attention to that. They should have worked closely with NIPS. They should have worked closely with the mobile payment company. They should have worked closely with the InterSwitch of this world, and make sure that at least that they have enough bandwidth to be able to handle the amount of transactions.
Okay. Now that we are where we are, what would your advice be in that regard?
Well, my advice in that regard is that, look, and I'm sure CBN is addressing all those issues right now. I think, I believe that the transaction has improved. I was able to make a few transactions yesterday. And so I think CBN is reacting to a lot of these issues on a daily basis. I mean, it's unfortunate, but I think next week, I think things will improve. I think the president spoke last, was it yesterday or Thursday morning? The president spoke, and 200 Naira should be available. A lot of the financial tech companies are up to date. They are addressing this issue. I think next week things should improve. But what I find quite interesting, because I've been monitoring this, is that for some reason there are not much issues and outcry in the north. A lot of it is right here in down south. And what I found out is that, because I went to visit a few of those banks, I walked around and disguising, and I spoke to a few of them. It seems that some of these guys don't, I think some of if you find out, at least what I discovered was that some of these guys don't even have any bank accounts. So what is the motivation behind it? The ones that are at least causing trouble and trying to burn down some of the bank branches.
But what do you make of that, really? Because, I mean, looking at the poverty figures, you would see that a lot more people, well, the North is said to have a lot more people, within that extremely poor category, as opposed to, down South here. So one would wonder why the angst, so to speak, more from the South as opposed to being from the North.
It's definitely a subject of research. I mean, there's more poverty in the North, less outcry in the North, but there's a lot in the South. It's definitely something of concern. Okay,
so to you then, what would you say Nigeria needs to recover from? Because, we just talked about poverty now, right? And there are those who are saying many of these things, the issues we are raising today, date back decades, even way before the 40 years that you've been doing this job, as you say. there are those who say these things have been building up over the years. We have hopes that things are going to get better, and the only things to get the other way. So what do we need to recover from, and what are the structural changes that need to be made if things are going to get better?
Look, let me tell you something. Things, without prejudicing, Nigeria has changed significantly since 2015. And that is as a result of lack of clarity. And that is what we're seeing now with the ruling party. So from 2015, before I address what we need now, I'm just going to throw some figures at you. From 20, I would talk about the federal government's revenue and debt service. So we were using 23% of our revenue to service our debt, on the average, from 2011 to 2014. And from 2015 to 2018, that number moved up to 52% of our revenue. And today, that number is about 80% of our revenue. That is the story. Look, I can take you one step back to Babangida Abacha era. It's a mirror of what we're experiencing right now. And after 1999, two great Nigerians took over. His Excellency Olusegun Obasanjo, His Excellency Atiku Abubakar. His Excellency Olusegun Obasanjo spent significant amount of time, the first 4 years, traveling the world, improving Nigerian image. And His Excellency Atiku Abubakar sat at home and focused on the economy. And the economy improved. We were able to have double-digit growth for the first time in a very long time. And as a result, many of us, including myself, I moved back from New York City, back to Lagos, Nigeria. I started my economic think tank. We all believed in Nigeria, right? And Nigeria moved forward. And so many stories, I always give the example of MTN, of the 2 trillion in revenue. That came through that time. So the key thing and what we need, what Nigeria needs, we need three C's. I keep saying that. We need clarity. We need coherent, and consistency. When you don't have the 3 C's, capital doesn't come. Nobody will believe you.
A quick one, Prof. Before you mentioned something, Dr. Akinkumi, about, you mentioned some figures now, and some people would also ask the question, how that, of course, I mean, as my colleague reminded you, having worked with the CBN at some point, the CBN has sort of overshot the limit of 5% granted it by the Central Bank Act, Section 38, by printing more than 23 trillion naira instead of 1 trillion naira, Is there a connection between that and inflation?
Of course. There's a price you pay, the seigniorage you pay. There is no cooperation between the physical side and the monetary side today. We're in a mess. The ways and means, the CBN, it's illegal for CBN to do that. And we all kept quiet. Everybody's screaming today. They didn't talk about that. Everybody kept quiet. All the ruling party governors, they didn't talk about that. The ruling party governors that are talking about cash in circulation, they didn't talk about that. They didn't talk about the inflation. Let me tell you something about inflation. But what this man, Richard Nixon, did in the 70s in America, when inflation was so high, the man stepped in and fixed prices for the first time. A government would do that. Fast forward today, in America, a lot of companies are giving subsidy. Not even the government. Companies are giving subsidies for employees towards buying food. The ruling party governors that are screaming today, they didn't address inflation for their people. They didn't talk about the Chibok girls. We all forgot about the Chibok girls, right? They didn't talk about the kidnapping, but they're now talking about cash. And again, let's look at this cash very carefully. Before this ruling party, the cash in circulation was about 1.4 trillion. September of last year was about 3.4 trillion. Keep in mind that we have high inflation.
Dr. Recession. I'm sorry, I've got to cut you short because we've fast run out of time, and I need to ask you about the budget. We've all been consumed by politics, so nobody is looking at implementing the budget. So whoever comes in is going to have a hard job looking at the 2023 budget and having to implement it.
You see, there's a supplementary budget. And the supplementary budget was to address the flooding incidents. And while they are doing the supplementary budget, they were preparing the 2023 budget. I don't understand why they couldn't put that in the 2023 budget. But that's another story for another day. I totally disagree with the initial projections on this budget because it does seems it's not based on the current trends, like the inflation numbers, like the oil production numbers. So whoever comes in, and I'm hoping Atiku Abubakar makes it, His Excellency Atiku Abubakar makes it, would have to readdress that budget. Look, how do we finance government? We finance government with debt, and we finance government with internet generating. We have to improve on that internet because it's actually quite poor. I'll tell you what I experienced in the last couple of days. I was in the Republic of Benin, Cotonou. And you know what these guys are doing? I went out to dinner on the Valentine's Day. So they have, for every transaction that happens, it hits the office of the revenue. So what I mean by that is that if you buy a plane ticket, you go to the restaurant, you check into a hotel, at the back end, so they are capturing every transactions. So what I mean by that is that, I understand this because I came from technology. So what I mean by that is that you can have any POS system you want, but in the back end, the government gets it. When we implement that, we don't need to raise taxes.
Okay.
We will capture every transactions and increase.
Yeah.
And that will help significantly with our budget. And will address all these projections in the budget. Because the key thing about the budget is really the projections, which does not work with the current trends.
One thing that one can say affirmatively is there's a lot more that you have to say. Unfortunately, we have run completely out of time. As my colleague said the other time, we'll have to continue this conversation some other time. But for now, we have to thank you, Dr. Mustapha.
Thank you very much.
An African economist. Thank you so much for the perspectives you've given us today.
Thank you.
Okay. So Sunrise continues right after this break. Please stay with us.